Welcome to Everyday Enlightenment, your go-to show that offers practical tips from expert guests at the end of every episode, designed to help you be more conscious in the midst of your busy modern life. We've all noticed how our mental state and breathing changes when we exercise or move our body in some way that challenges us. And maybe you've also noticed that when you get anxious, scared, or angry, that your breath pattern changes and usually becomes jagged and unbalanced. Well, if physical movement changes the mind and the breath, is it also possible that controlling our breath can drastically change the conditioning of our mind and of our bodies? Today, my guest is Dr. Joe Dispenza, a doctor, a scientist, and a modern-day mystic known for sharing all-term discoveries of quantum science and the deep teachings that adepts of the past dedicated their entire lifetimes to master. Dr. Joe, thanks for being here today with me.
I'm very happy to be with you.
Well, I loved reading in your most recent book, Becoming Supernatural, one of the chapters specifically where you talk about a breath that helps us pull the mind out of the body.
Yes. Well, we have a body in our mind mapped in the brain, and we have a mind in our body. And Descartes kind of separated the two, but there's never a time where the body isn't influencing the mind. And there's never a time where the mind isn't influencing the body. In fact, they're one and the same. So the majority of people's thoughts are connected to certain feelings that influence very specific hormonal centers in the body. For example, if you think an angry thought, you are going to release certain chemicals that activate your adrenal system. You're going to begin to activate survival systems. If you feel suffering, or if you feel pain, or you feel guilty, you produce a different biochemical reaction, produces different hormonal centers to be activated. So most people's thoughts and feelings are taking most of the energy of those thoughts and storing them in the first three energy centers of the body. People call them chakras, but the first three centers are centers of survival. And the procreation, consumption, and fight or flight is how most people have survived the majority of their lives. In other words, in survival, it's not a good time to open your heart. So very little people actually make the effort to open their heart. And most of their thoughts and feelings are activating these lower centers. So the majority of the body's energy is stored in these first three centers. So then 95% of that energy stored in the body has to be liberated and driven back to the brain. So we do this breath as a way to pull the mind out of the body or send the energy. And yogis would probably love this breath because they have a lot of conscious control over the intrinsic muscles of their body. So the breath is about contracting those intrinsic muscles, the muscles of the perineum, the front and back muscles we use for elimination, the muscles of our lower abdomen or upper abdomen. When we inhale through our nose and we squeeze these muscles, what we're doing is we're pulling that energy from those lower centers up into the brain. Now, when you inhale, normally when we're just hanging out and breathing, when you inhale, the sutures of your skull slightly open up, and your bone, the base of your spine, called your sacrum, that upside down triangle, actually flexes back. So when you inhale and those sutures open up and your sacrum flexes back, the spinal fluid drains. When you exhale, your sacrum flexes forward and those sutures close and it pushes the fluid up. And so inhaling and exhaling begins to propagate a wave.
So let's go into that for a moment here, because I think a lot of people in the Western world, or definitely in the modern world, think that in order to really make change in our body, that we have to do these big drastic movements, whether it's, yoga, big sweeping hard yoga classes, or fitness or CrossFit or P90X, or some of these really somewhat aggressive forms of movement tend to be looked at as the major way to make physiological, not just physical, but physiological change inside the body. And just by you articulating the way that these really delicate systems of the cerebral spinal fluid and the connection between the skull and the sacrum, that's some pretty profound effects that we're talking about simply by breathing. That's naturally happening all the time.
Now, cerebrospinal fluid is made of proteins and salts in solution. And proteins and salts in solution have a charge. When you drop them in solution, they have a negative or positive charge. So now when you begin to inhale and you begin to pull that cerebrospinal fluid up towards your brain and you accelerate those charged molecules, according to physics, when you accelerate a charged molecule, you create an invisible field called an inductance field. So now there's information going from your brain to your body and from your body to the brain all the time. But when you do this breath and you start accelerating those charged molecules, you create this inductance field moving in a certain direction, and all of a sudden, all that energy from those lower centers start moving up to the brain. If you do this properly and you have a little passion and you start moving this fluid, there'll come a moment where the sympathetic nervous system will switch on and merge with the parasympathetic nervous system. And when that happens, all of a sudden, all the energy you use to make a baby, all the energy you use to digest the meal, all the energy you use in a stress response, instead of it being released out chemically, it's being drawn up to the brain. All that energy goes right up into the limbic brain, and it hits a gland called the pineal gland. And the pineal gland is a very specific gland that makes serotonin and melatonin. And when that energy strikes that gland, all of a sudden it begins to produce very powerful metabolites, sister molecules. And all of a sudden now the brain becomes super lucid. And the brain waves that we start to measure are very, very high gamma brainwave patterns. Now the person is super conscious. Now there's more energy in the brain. And when that happens, whatever's happening between their ears becomes more real. And in a sense, they're having an orgasm in their brain. They're going into a state of ecstasy. So then you're transmuting anger, you're transmuting fear, you're transmuting guilt or suffering into pure energy.
As well, too.
Pain is